Today we're going to be creating a watercolor background. So I'm going to talk about how to use warm and cool colors on our background. And before we get there, I want to point out a couple of things. At the end of our last session, my water was bluish or blue-violet, and I have gotten clean water. And I have gotten another paper towel. One thing I did not show you last time is, remember at the end of your session, to rinse your brush, and you can pinch out the water and let it dry. But the other part that's very important is to clean out your lid. So with your paper towel, watercolors, we never run them under the sink because all the paint will go away and you won't have anything left. But because this is our mixing area, it will clean up best if we do it while it is still wet, and then we're fresh and ready to go for the next time. If your paint pans are very wet, leave it open on the counter for an hour or two, or maybe even overnight to dry so that you can start fresh. Today we are going to be creating a background. So before I start to paint, I'm putting background on this is our watercolor assignment number 2, and our name and art period. Okay, once our paper is wet and we start painting, we're going to have to wait till it's totally dry to do that. So it's important to do that first. Today we are not using crayons. We are just painting the background. And it will work best if you choose basically warm or basically cool colors. In this painting, the background, you'll notice, is very transparent. That is what watercolor is. Transparent, remember, means see-through. And I have an area that's warm and another area that's warm, and then I have cool in between. So if I want the colors to stay pure and transparent, I have to keep the warm and cool colors more separate. So I'm going to mix up some warm colors here. Remember last time we started by putting a couple drops of clean water into each pan. If your paints are very wet, you won't need to do that. Again, we are not using brown or black, so no water there. And I'm going to put some violet here at the end. I'm going to put some blue next to that. I'm going to put some green over here. I'm going to put some red over here. Some yellow over here. Yellow is a color that often changes very quickly, so I want to be sure that I use a separated pan for that. And I'll put a little orange over here. Notice the green and orange are not close to each other. They're not touching. Since we're making our background today, we're going to use mostly wet into wet. So my paper will not stay wet the whole time. So I'm going to wet about 1/4 of my paper. And while it is still shiny, that means it's still wet, the paint will flow very well. I'm going to come in and just kind of dabble or add paint in a couple places. I'm not really painting, I'm just sort of touching the paper with my brush. And then I need to wet another 1/4 of my painting. As much as possible, I want to go all the way to the edge of the paper. Now I have a cardboard underneath my painting just so I don't get water on the table. If you have that, you can do that, but that's certainly not necessary. If you have newspaper, you can put a sheet of newspaper underneath your painting. Or after you're done painting, you just use a paper towel to wipe up the table. And you'll notice I'm not brushing back over what I've already painted. So now I'm going to wet the next section. Watercolor paper dries pretty rapidly. So since we're using our wet into wet technique, I do want the paint to flow pretty evenly. So if I want more yellow, I might put that down first. And the paint will mix by itself. And then also I can mix some of the colors in the pan. But I'm letting the paint mix itself on the paper. And if some of my other places look kind of blah and the paper is still shiny, that's very important. The paper has to be still kind of shiny. If it's not shiny, it's not wet, and the pigment is not going to move around. And then I'll come over here and finish this out. Now, I do want to show you a transition. So I'm going to transition to a cool area, and I'm going to use red as my transition color because red and blue make what? They make violet. So if I wanted to transition to some cool colors, and now before I add any other cool colors, I'll come back and I will add water. I'm not brushing over what I've added with the blue pigment, and I'm not going to add violet by itself. I'm going to add blue violet. The colors are always more interesting if we let, and now let's make this a little blue green here on the end, if we let them mix by themselves. And watercolor is transparent, so it's going to dry lighter. This is kind of nice here with a darker edge. Maybe I want a little bit darker here. But remember, I'm not painting objects. And again, the paper has to be shiny for the pigment to move. If it's not shiny, it's not going to move. Okay, and then that's going to dry, and we will be using this next time. Do not pick up your paper when it's wet. The paper will tear, and also the colors will run. Okay, so that's the end of our painting for this paper. Our next step, remember, is to use our paper towel to wipe up our extra pigment in the box. And what's another thing that's really important, notice I didn't brush back and forth over this. If I look at this painting that's already dry, I can see some of the brush marks there. Okay, I want to keep that. That's going to be very important. And if you have a lot of wet paint in your lid and a lot of water, you might need 2 paper towels, but it really is much easier to clean up your tray when it is wet. Okay, now, something else we need to talk about is that watercolor paints will stain your clothes, so I would not recommend wearing a white shirt. And if you get paint on yourself, particularly if it's violet, you need to wash it out right away with cold water. Just rinse it, and if you let it sit, you're going to have a violet freckle on your clothes. Okay, all right, so next time we're going to talk about the next step of what to do with our background. This is going to become our background for an artwork. And you can see on this larger painting that a drawing is started on the back. So this is a warm colored wet into wet background, and there's a figure here and some gears. Now we are not working this large because we're all working at home, so we're working half size, but we're going to develop a drawing idea using our background, and we'll talk more about that next time.